Zexthara's four eyes dimmed as he stared into his drink. The blue liquid swirled like the memories that haunted him every night. Across the table, a young merchant from the Outer Rim leaned forward, eager to hear the war stories everyone whispered about. "You want to know about humans?" Zexthara's voice was rough like grinding metal. "I will tell you, but do not think these are just stories. Every word I speak is true, every detail burned into my mind like acid." The alien soldier lifted, his massive head. His skin was gray and covered in scars that glowed faintly in the dim light of the cantina. Some scars were from energy weapons, others were from human bullets. All of them told a story of a war that should have been easy, but became a nightmare. "It started with Kepler Station," he began, "a small mining outpost on the edge of human space. My commanders called it a supply depot. Nothing more than a fuel stop for human cargo ships. The intelligence report said 30 humans worked there, engineers and technicians, no soldiers, no weapons, no defenses worth mentioning." Zexthara paused to drink. The liquid burned his throat, but not as much as the memories burned his mind. The Kethvan Empire had 800 warriors ready for the assault. Our best troops, veterans who had conquered 12 worlds. We had plasma cannons and energy shields. Our armor could stop anything humans could throw at us. Or so we thought. Merchant's eyes widened. He had heard rumors about human battles, but never from someone who was actually there. Commander Jake Morrison was the human in charge of Kepler Station. Intelligence said he was just an engineer, 42 years old, no military training, no combat experience. The humans had sent him there to fix broken machinery and keep the lights on. That was all. Zexthara's laugh was bitter. We learned later that Jake Morrison had served in 3 human wars before he became an engineer. The humans did not put that in his official records. They never do. Humans always lie about how dangerous they are. The attack began at dawn on Kepler Station's 26-hour cycle. The Kethvan fleet surrounded the small outpost like hunters surrounding wounded prey. 8 massive warships against one tiny station that looked like it could barely hold together in a strong wind. Admiral Vorthak gave the humans 1 hour to surrender, standard procedure. Most species give up when they see our ships. Humans are different. Jake Morrison's voice came over the communication channel clear and calm. He said 3 words: "Come and take it." The first wave of Kethvan troops hit the station's docking bay expecting to find humans cowering in corners. Instead, they found empty corridors and silence that felt wrong. Too quiet, too still, like the moment before lightning strikes. Sergeant Pete Davis was waiting in the maintenance tunnels. The intelligence report said he was a plumber, someone who fixed broken pipes and cleaned waste systems. But Pete Davis moved through those tunnels like a ghost. He knew every inch of that station, every bolt and wire and hidden passage. The Kethvan soldiers spread through the station in formation. Professional, disciplined, ready for resistance that never came. The humans seemed to have vanished into the walls themselves. Then the explosion started. Lieutenant Amy Collins had been busy while we surrounded the station. The reports called her a chemical engineer, someone who tested air quality and managed waste disposal. But Amy Collins knew exactly how to turn cleaning supplies into bombs. She rigged the ventilation system with compounds that burned Kethvan lungs like fire. The first squad of Kethvan warriors died choking on their own blood. The second squad tried to advance through a corridor that erupted in flames hot enough to melt their armor. The third squad found doors that had been welded shut from the inside, trapping them in rooms that slowly filled with poisonous gas. Every step forward cost us lives. Every room was a trap. Every corridor was a killing ground. These were not soldiers fighting us. These were engineers and technicians and mechanics. But they fought like demons. Jake Morrison's voice echoed through the station's communication system. He did not threaten or boast. He simply gave updates like a news reporter. Kethvan casualties, 47. Station integrity, 92%. Human casualties, 0. The Kethvan commanders could not believe what they were hearing. Their elite warriors were being slaughtered by maintenance workers and computer programmers. Admiral Vorthak ordered the second wave to attack. Dr. Helen Brooks ran the station's medical bay. Our intelligence said she treated minor injuries and handed out medicine for headaches. But Helen Brooks had turned her medical supplies into weapons. She created drugs that made our soldiers see things that were not there, hallucinations that turned friends into enemies. Kethvan troops began firing at each other in the corridors. They saw human attackers where there were only shadows. They heard enemy voices where there was only silence. The station's medical bay became a factory of madness that spread through the ventilation system like a plague. Meanwhile, Communications Officer Danny Pierce had taken control of the station's computer network. The humans had listed him as a simple technician who maintained radio equipment. But Danny Pierce was rewriting the station's programming in real time. The lights would turn off just as our soldiers entered a room. Then emergency lighting would blind them from unexpected angles. Doors would lock automatically, separating our troops into small groups. The computer system played sounds of Kethvan death screams from empty rooms. It was psychological warfare at its finest. Day after day, the siege continued. The Kethvan threw more troops at the station, but the humans adapted to every new tactic. When energy weapons were used, they found ways to redirect the power through the station's electrical grid. When explosives were deployed, they used the rubble to create new defensive positions. Chief Engineer Bob Taylor kept the station running no matter what we did to it. We cut the power lines and he rerouted electricity through the water pipes. We destroyed the main computer and he built a new one from spare parts. We breached the hull and he sealed it with materials that should not have worked but somehow did. The human defenders never seemed to sleep. When Kethvan forces attacked at night, they found the humans ready and waiting. When they tried surprise assaults at dawn, the humans were already in position. It was as if the entire station had become a living organism with 30 human brains controlling its every function. Navigator Kate Williams used her knowledge of space routes to predict our supply schedules. She knew when our ships would need to refuel and when our troops would need fresh equipment. The humans timed their attacks to hit us when we were most vulnerable. By the end of the second week, Kethvan morale was breaking. These were warriors who had conquered planets, but they could not take a single mining station from 30 humans who should have surrendered on the first day. The humans sent another message. This time it was Amy Collins speaking. Her voice was tired but determined. "You can leave now and we will not hunt you through space. Stay here and we will make sure none of you go home." Admiral Vorthak increased the assault to full-scale bombardment. Energy cannons that could crack mountains fired at the station's outer hull. But Jake Morrison and his team had reinforced the critical systems and moved everything important deep, underground. The station looked like it was dying, but the humans kept fighting. They used the destroyed sections as new defensive positions. They turned our own weapon impacts into sources of raw materials. Nothing we did seemed to stop them. On the 21st day of the siege, human reinforcements finally arrived. 3 ships against 8 Kethvan vessels. But the humans had been in contact with Kepler station throughout the entire battle. They knew exactly where to hit the Kethvan fleet to cause maximum damage. The rescue fleet attacked like precision instruments. Every shot calculated, every maneuver planned. The Kethvan ships that had seemed so powerful 3 weeks earlier were torn apart by enemies who fought like they had been planning this battle for years. Zexthera finished his drink and looked at the merchant with eyes that had seen too much. "We lost 637 warriors taking a mining station from 30 engineers. The humans lost 4 people. 4. And they made us pay for every meter of corridor with Kethvan blood." The merchant sat in stunned silence. "That was when we learned the first rule about fighting humans," Zexthera continued. "Never believe their official records. A human engineer is also a warrior. A human doctor is also a weapons expert. A human cook can probably kill you with kitchen tools. They do not separate their roles like we do. Every human is a soldier when they need to be." He stood to leave but paused at the table. And that was just the beginning of our education about what humans can do when you corner them. The siege of Kepler Station was the easy part of the war. The cantina had grown quieter as Zexathara's first story ended. Other patrons had stopped their conversations to listen. Word traveled fast in places like this, and everyone knew the scarred Kethvan soldier had stories that could chill blood. Across 3 star systems, Zexithara ordered another blue drink and stared at the liquid for a long moment. His 4 eyes reflected the dim lights like broken glass. The merchant across from him waited patiently, knowing that rushing would end the stories before they really began. 6 months after Kepler station, my unit was assigned to the dreadnought Sharthek, biggest ship in the Kethvan fleet. 5,000 crew members, weapons that could destroy moons. We felt safe there, powerful, ready to show the humans what real warfare looked like. The alien soldier's voice dropped lower. Around the cantina, conversation stopped completely. Even the bartender pretended to clean glasses while listening. The humans had been quiet for weeks. Too quiet. Our intelligence said their fleet was broken after 3 major battles. Their supply lines were cut. Their colonies were isolated. High command believed the war was almost over. Zexthara laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was the laugh of someone who had learned that believing anything about humans was dangerous. Then we found the UES Marauder drifting in the Vega sector. Dead in space, no power signatures, no life signs. Hull breached in 17 places. The ship looked like it had been through a meat grinder. The Marauder was a human destroyer. Not their biggest ship, but dangerous enough when it was working. The sensor reading showed massive internal damage. Reactor coolant leaking into space. Life support systems offline. Everything pointed to a crew that had died fighting to the last breath. Captain Lisa Grant's ship had a reputation. She was known for taking missions that other captains called impossible. The intelligence report said she was reckless, always pushing her crew and her ship beyond safe limits. The kind of human who would rather die than retreat. Admiral Korthvan saw an opportunity. A dead human warship meant intelligence data, computer files, weapon designs, technology that could help end the war faster. He ordered a full salvage operation with 200 elite Marines. The boarding parties launched at dawn cycle. Commander Vexitar led the first wave. 40 Marines in full combat armor. Energy weapons charged. Sensors scanning for any signs of life. Standard procedure for dealing with human wrecks. The first team entered through the main cargo bay. The massive doors hung open like a mouth frozen in a final scream. Emergency lighting flickered weakly in the corridors. The air was thin and cold. Everything looked exactly like a ship where the crew had died days ago. Chief Engineer Bob Taylor's body was found in the engine room, slumped over his control panel like he had died trying to restart the reactor. Medical scans showed radiation poisoning, burns from plasma exposure. Everything, consistent with a heroic engineer dying at his post. The Kethvan Marines spread through the ship in teams of 5. Professional search patterns. Each section cleared methodically. They found more bodies in the corridors. Navigation Officer Kate Williams at her station. Communications Specialist Danny Pierce in the radio room. All dead from various combat injuries. The medical bay held the worst scene. Dr. Rachel Kim had apparently tried to treat wounded crew members as the ship was dying. Bodies on stretchers, medical equipment scattered on the floor, blood on the walls. It looked like she had fought death itself and lost. Commander Vexitar reported back to the Sharthek that the ship was secure. 47 human bodies found, no survivors. The salvage teams could begin extracting useful technology and information. Everything was proceeding according to plan. That was when the first Marine disappeared. Private Zorthek was guarding the engine room when his communication signal went dead. His team found his armor in a maintenance shaft. Empty, no body inside. No signs of struggle, like he had simply vanished into the metal walls. The Marines. Increased security protocols. Paired searches only. Constant communication checks. But the disappearances continued. 2 Marines from the bridge team, 3 from the weapons section. Each time, only empty armor left behind. The Kethvan started to panic. Dead ships do not eat soldiers. But something was hunting them in those dark corridors. Something that knew the ship better than they did. Commander Vextar called for reinforcements. 50 more Marines boarded. The Marauder with heavy weapons and scanning equipment. Thermal detectors to find hidden life signs. Motion sensors to track movement. Everything they needed to hunt ghosts. The reinforcements found something much worse than ghosts. Captain Lisa Grant was not dead. None of her crew was dead. They had used human medical techniques to fake their own deaths. Drugs that slowed their heartbeats to almost nothing. Makeup that created realistic wounds. Technology that fooled Kethvan scanners. The humans had been awake and moving through their own ship while the Kethvan searched it. They used maintenance tunnels too small for alien bodies. Hidden passages, built into the ship's design. Secret routes that let them appear and disappear like spirits. Chief Engineer Bob Taylor had not died at his station. He had been rerouting power to hidden weapon systems throughout the ship. While the Kethvan thought they were safe on a dead vessel, Taylor was turning the Marauder into a floating death trap. The ship's internal defenses came online all at once. Blast doors slammed shut, separating marine teams. Emergency vents opened, flooding sections with sleeping gas. The artificial gravity switched off in some areas and doubled in others. The humans were fighting back from inside their own grave. Lieutenant Commander Helen Brooks coordinated the psychological warfare. She used the ship's communication system to broadcast sounds through the corridors. Kethvan death screams from earlier encounters, recorded messages from Marines who had already been captured, the voices of friends calling for help from empty rooms. The Kethvan Marines began shooting at shadows. They heard their own names called from dark corners. They saw movement that was not there. The humans had turned fear into a weapon sharper than any blade. Meanwhile, Navigation Officer Kate Williams was rewriting the ship's computer systems in real time. She made the lights flicker in patterns that spelled out Kethvan words, threats, warnings, messages that said the Marines would never leave the ship alive. Communications Officer Danny Pierce had tapped into our military frequencies. He was feeding false information back to the Sharthek, reports that the salvage was going well, updates that everything was under control. While our Marines were being hunted, Pierce made sure no one would come to help them. The human crew of 47 was picking off boarding parties of 200, Marines using nothing but their knowledge of their own ship. They appeared from walls, struck like lightning, and vanished before the Kethvan could respond. Dr. Rachel Kim was not treating wounded humans in her medical bay. She was studying captured Kethvan Marines, learning our weaknesses, our fears. She used medical equipment to enhance human abilities, drugs that let them see in the dark, stimulants that made them faster and stronger. Hour by hour, the Kethvan force on the Marauder grew smaller, but the reports to the Sharthek continued to say everything was fine. Admiral Korthvan had no idea his Marines were being systematically eliminated by people who were supposed to be corpses. Captain Lisa Grant appeared on the ship's main screen at hour 12. She looked exactly like she had when our intelligence files were made. Calm, professional, completely in control. She spoke directly to Commander Vextar. Grant's message was simple. The Kethvan could surrender and be treated as prisoners of war according to human military law, or they could continue the boarding action and discover what happened to species that threatened human crews on their own ships. Vextar chose to fight. Military pride, Kethvan honor. He could not admit that dead humans had outsmarted living warriors. He ordered his remaining Marines to hunt down the human crew and end the charade. That was when the humans stopped playing games. Chief Engineer Bob Taylor activated the ship's main weapons while the Kethvan were still aboard. Energy cannons, designed to destroy enemy vessels, fired point-blank into the Sharthek's docking bay. The explosion killed 300 of our crew and crippled our main engines. The Marauder was no longer pretending to be dead. Full power to all systems. Weapons charged, shields raised. The ship that had been bait became a predator in the space of seconds. Lieutenant Commander Helen Brooks had programmed the Marauders, computers with targeting data for every critical system on Kethvan ships. While we thought we were salvaging their technology, they were learning how to destroy ours. The battle lasted 6 hours. One human destroyer against the largest ship in the Kethvan fleet, but the Marauder fought like it was possessed by demons. Every shot perfectly placed, every maneuver calculated to cause maximum damage. Navigation Officer Kate Williams flew that ship like it was part of her own body. She knew exactly how to use the Sharthek's size against it. We were too big to maneuver quickly, too massive to avoid attacks that smaller ships could dodge. The merchant had ordered his own drink by now, something strong from the outer rim that burned blue as it went down. His hands shook slightly as he held the glass. The stories were getting to him, just like they got to everyone who heard them. Zexithara noticed but said nothing. Fear was a reasonable response to learning about humans. The third lesson came at Proxima Drift. Zexithara began, his voice steady, but tired. 8 months into the war, High Command decided to end things, quickly with overwhelming force. 3 full battle fleets, 900 ships, enough firepower to turn planets into dust. The cantina had filled with listeners now. Word had spread through the station that the scarred Kethvan was telling war stories. Real ones. Not the propaganda that passed for news in most places. Even the bartender had stopped pretending to work. The humans sent 3 ships to meet us. 3. Our admirals laughed when the sensor readings came in. It had to be a mistake. No species was stupid enough to fight 900 warships with 3 vessels. But the readings were correct. Commander Ryan Clark commanded the small human fleet from the UES Defiance. The ship was old even by human standards, built 40 years before the war started. The kind of vessel that most races would have sent to scrapyards decades ago. But humans kept their old ships running with spare parts and determination. Intelligence said Clark was nobody special. Career officer who had never commanded more than 6 ships at once. No major victories, no tactical innovations. Just another human who had worked his way up through steady service and following orders. The D.D. Kethvan fleet arranged itself in standard battle formation. 3 groups of 300 ships each. Overlapping fields of fire. Coordinated assault patterns that had worked against every enemy the Empire had ever faced. Simple mathematics said the battle would last less than an hour. Admiral Thekvar sent the traditional surrender demand. Standard procedure. Give the humans one chance to avoid total destruction. Clark's response came back in perfect Kethvan. He had learned our language well enough to insult us in words that do not translate politely. The human fleet moved toward the asteroid field at the edge of the Proxima system. Dense rocks floating in space like a 3-dimensional maze. Most commanders avoided asteroid fields because they limited maneuverability and created navigation hazards. Clark flew straight into the middle of it. Our tactical computers calculated 17,000 possible hiding spots among those rocks, but 3 ships could not use them all effectively. Clark was trapping himself in a place where superior numbers would matter less, but he was still outnumbered 300 to 1. The Kethvan fleet followed the humans into the asteroid field, in pursuit formation. Fast attack groups designed to corner prey that tried to run, but Ryan Clark was not running. He was preparing the battlefield. Lieutenant Commander Helen Brooks was Clark's science officer. Our files said she studied star formation and calculated jump routes. Boring academic work. But Helen Brooks had spent weeks mapping every rock in that asteroid field. She knew the exact mass and orbit of objects too small for our sensors to track properly. The first Kethvan ships entered the asteroid field expecting to find 3 human vessels hiding behind rocks like frightened children. Instead, they found empty space. The human ships had vanished completely. 900 Kethvan vessels spread through the field searching for targets that seemed to have disappeared. Then the rocks started moving. Helen Brooks had calculated gravitational effects with precision that seemed impossible. She knew exactly which asteroids would shift orbit, if pushed at the right angle. Which rocks would collide with others to create chain reactions. She had turned the entire asteroid field into a weapon. The human ships appeared from behind large asteroids, just long enough to fire precise shots at smaller rocks. Not attacking Kethvan vessels directly, but nudging space debris into new trajectories. Physics did the rest of the work. Communications officer Danny Pierce had intercepted our fleet communications for weeks before the battle. He knew our tactical procedures better than some of our own officers. He fed false sensor data into our networks, making our ships think asteroids were in different locations than they actually were. Kethvan vessels found themselves flying into rocks that their computers insisted were not there. Navigation systems that had worked perfectly for decades suddenly became unreliable. Ships crashed into obstacles that appeared on sensors only seconds before impact. The worst part was that we could not find the human ships to fight them. They would appear for 30 seconds, fire a few shots at asteroids, then vanish again. Our weapons were designed to destroy enemy vessels, but we were fighting gravity and momentum instead. Admiral Thekvar ordered the fleet to maintain formation and advance systematically through the field, standard procedure for dealing with ambush tactics. But Helen Brooks had predicted that response and prepared for it. The human science officer had identified the largest asteroid in the field, a rock the size of a small moon. She calculated exactly where to place explosive charges to split it into fragments that would spray across 3 different vectors. The UES Defiance appeared directly in front of the massive asteroid and fired every weapon at once. Not at Kethvan ships, but at specific points on the rock surface. The asteroid cracked along fault lines that Helen Brooks had mapped from sensor data, splitting into pieces that flew toward different sections of the Kethvan fleet. Each fragment was the size of a building and moving fast enough to punch through our heaviest armor. We had to break formation to avoid being crushed. That was when Clark struck with his real attack. The human ships had not been hiding randomly among the asteroids. They had been positioning themselves at calculated points where the Kethvan fleet would be forced to scatter. Ryan Clark had predicted exactly how Admiral Thekvar would respond to the asteroid bombardment. Navigator Kate Williams flew the UES Defiance through gaps in our formation that existed for only seconds at a time. Impossible flying that should have gotten her ship destroyed. But she had practiced those maneuvers for weeks, using computer simulations that Helen Brooks had programmed. The human ships attacked from 3 directions at once, hitting Kethvan vessels that were isolated from mutual support. Quick strikes against engines and weapon systems, not trying to destroy ships completely, but crippling them so they could not fight effectively. Chief Engineer Bob Taylor had modified the human weapons to fire specialized ammunition, electromagnetic pulses that disrupted our computer systems, gravity mines that pulled nearby ships off course. Technology we had never seen before because humans had invented it specifically for this battle. The Kethvan fleet tried to regroup, but found their communication networks compromised. Danny Pierce had been broadcasting false orders that sounded like they came from Admiral Thekvar himself. Ships moved to positions where they blocked each other's weapons. Attack formations became confused tangles that helped no one. Dr. Rachel Kim was monitoring our medical frequencies from the human command ship. She knew exactly how many casualties we were taking and where our injured were being treated. The humans targeted our medical ships first, forcing us to choose between helping wounded comrades and maintaining combat effectiveness. Hours passed with the Kethvan fleet taking steady losses while the human ships remained largely untouched. Every time Admiral Thekvar thought he had cornered them, the humans would use another calculated asteroid movement to escape an attack from a new angle. Lieutenant Commander Helen Brooks had programmed contingency plans for every possible Kethvan response. If we advanced, asteroids would block our path. If we retreated, rocks would fall on us from above. If we split up, the humans would attack isolated groups. If we stayed together, we would be trapped in killing zones. The battle turned when Ryan Clark broadcast a message to the entire Kethvan fleet. Not a threat or demand for surrender, but a tactical analysis of what was happening. He explained exactly how his 3 ships were defeating 900 Kethvan vessels, using mathematics that our own officers could verify. Clark wanted us to understand that we were not losing because of superior technology or greater numbers. We were losing because humans think about warfare differently than other species. They see battles as puzzles to be solved, rather than contests of strength. Admiral Thekvar realized that continuing the fight would only result in more Kethvan casualties, without any hope of victory. The human commander had turned the laws of physics into weapons, and the asteroid field into a fortress that could not be conquered by conventional means. The withdrawal order came after 14 hours of combat, longest battle in Kethvan military history where we never once successfully engaged the main enemy force. Our ships limped away from Proxima drift with 40% casualties and no tactical victories to show for it. Ryan Clark let the Kethvan fleet retreat without pursuit. His 3 ships had suffered minor damage from asteroid impacts, but no serious casualties. They had proven that humans could defeat any enemy if they understood the battlefield better than their opponents did. Intelligence reports after the battle showed that Clark had been studying that asteroid field for 6 months before we arrived. The cantina had grown crowded with beings from across the galaxy. Word traveled fast on space stations and everyone wanted to hear the Kethvan war veteran tell his stories about fighting humans. Zexathara looked uncomfortable with the attention, but continued anyway. Some stories needed to be told no matter how much they hurt to remember. The fourth lesson happened at Blackwater Prison on Vergara Prime. He began, his voice barely above a whisper. The crowd leaned forward to hear every word. By the 10th month of the war, we had captured many humans. Soldiers, civilians, engineers, doctors, anyone who might have useful information about human military capabilities. The merchant who had been listening since the beginning ordered food he forgot to eat. His hands were steady now, but his eyes never left Zexathara's scarred face. The stories were changing him, just like they changed everyone who heard them. Blackwater was our most secure facility, built deep underground on a planet with no human colonies nearby. 5 levels of security barriers, guard posts every 50 meters, energy fields that could stop anything from escaping. The Kethvan Empire had held prisoners there for 200 years without a single successful escape. The prison complex was carved into solid rock 3 kilometers below the planet's surface. Multiple independent power systems, air recycling that could work for decades without outside support, food production facilities that made the prison completely self-sufficient. It was designed to be impossible to attack from outside and impossible to escape from inside. Warden Keltharn commanded Blackwater with 8,000 guards, elite security troops trained specifically for prison duty. The facility held 12,000 prisoners from 17 different species, humans made up, only a small fraction of the total population. 347 humans were imprisoned in the deepest level of Blackwater, military personnel captured in various battles, civilian technicians taken from conquered stations, medical staff who had refused to abandon their posts when Kethvan forces arrived, all considered valuable sources of intelligence about human capabilities and weaknesses. The humans had been model prisoners for 6 months. They followed all rules, caused no trouble, answered questions during interrogation sessions. Our psychologists said they had accepted their situation and were cooperating to improve their living conditions. Captain Alex Turner was the ranking human military officer among the prisoners. Intelligence files described him as a logistics specialist, someone who managed supply lines and transportation schedules, not a combat soldier or tactical genius. Just a middle-level officer who had been captured when his supply depot was overrun. Turner organized the human prisoners into work groups that helped maintain the prison systems. They volunteered for maintenance duties, cleaning schedules, food service assignments. The humans seemed eager to make themselves useful rather than sit in cells all day. Warden Keltharn was pleased with human cooperation. It made his job easier and reduced the need for harsh security measures. The humans were given more freedom to move through certain sections of the prison. They earned privileges through good behavior and helpful attitudes, but the humans were not being cooperative. They were studying the prison. Engineer Carla Rodriguez had volunteered for maintenance duty in the power systems. Our records said she fixed broken equipment and performed routine inspections. But Carla Rodriguez was mapping every wire, every circuit, every backup generator in the entire facility. For 6 months, Rodriguez worked her way through the prison's infrastructure. She memorized power grid layouts. She learned how the security systems connected to each other. She identified which components were critical and which were redundant, all while appearing to be nothing more than a helpful prisoner who wanted to stay busy. Demolitions expert Frank Miller had been assigned to the geological survey team. Blackwater prison was built in an earthquake zone, so regular surveys were required to ensure structural stability. Miller spent months taking rock samples and measuring ground vibrations. The Kethvan guards thought Miller was helping them maintain prison safety. He mapped fault lines and stress points in the surrounding rock. He calculated how the underground complex would respond to various types of seismic activity. He identified exactly which supports were critical to structural integrity. But Frank Miller was not protecting the prison. He was learning how to destroy it. Tech specialist Emma Johnson worked in the prison computer center. Data entry and file maintenance. Simple clerical work that any educated prisoner could handle. Johnson appeared to be processing routine paperwork and organizing digital records. Emma Johnson had complete access to the prison's computer networks, security protocols, guard schedules, personnel records, emergency procedures, communication systems, everything that controlled how Blackwater Prison functioned on a daily basis. She memorized it all while appearing to do boring office work. Pilot Chris Evans was assigned to the Vehicle Maintenance Department. Blackwater had hundreds of ground vehicles for transporting supplies and personnel. Evans helped repair engines and performed routine mechanical inspections. The Kethvan mechanics appreciated having skilled help with their workload. Evans learned how every vehicle in the prison operated, which ones were fastest, which could carry the most passengers, where they were fueled and how they were tracked, which routes they used to reach the surface. All the human prisoners were gathering information, but they were doing it so slowly and carefully that no one noticed. 6 months of small observations that built into a complete understanding of how to break an unbreakable prison. Captain Alex Turner coordinated everything from his cell. He was not just a logistics officer. Turner was a master of long-term planning, who could see how dozens of small actions would combine into one large result. The humans had been planning their escape since the day they arrived at Blackwater. Not a desperate attempt to run away, but a carefully orchestrated operation that would require perfect timing and flawless execution. The escape began at exactly 14:23 local time on a Tuesday afternoon. To the Kethvan guards, it started as a minor earthquake. Seismic activity was common on Vergara Prime, so no one was immediately concerned when the ground began to shake. Frank Miller had spent months identifying the exact location where a small explosion would trigger a natural geological event. Not enough to destroy the prison completely, but sufficient to create chaos and disable security systems. The earthquake lasted 47 seconds. Emergency lighting activated as main power systems went offline. Security barriers switched to backup power. Communication networks experienced temporary disruptions. Standard procedures for dealing with seismic events went into effect automatically. Engineer Carla Rodriguez had sabotaged the backup power system 6 weeks earlier, small modifications that would cause failures only during high-stress situations like earthquakes. When the emergency generators were needed most, they began shutting down one by one. The prison's sophisticated security network started failing, in cascade patterns. Energy barriers flickered and died. Electronic locks defaulted to open positions. Surveillance cameras went dark section by section. Everything that made Blackwater impregnable was disappearing during what appeared to be a natural disaster. Tech specialist Emma Johnson activated programs she had been hiding in the computer system for months. False security alerts that sent guards to empty sections of the prison. Automated door controls that opened escape routes while sealing pursuit paths. Communication interference that prevented coordination between guard units. In the confusion of the earthquake and system failures, 347 human prisoners simply walked out of their cells and began moving through the prison complex. They knew exactly where to go, because they had spent 6 months studying every corridor and learning every security procedure. The humans split into groups of 12 and followed evacuation routes that pilot Chris Evans had memorized from vehicle maintenance schedules. They moved like they owned the prison, because they understood it better than the guards who worked there every day. Emergency protocols required all prisoners to be evacuated to surface shelters during major seismic events. The humans joined evacuation groups and followed standard procedures. Prison guards were too busy dealing with system failures to check individual prisoner identifications carefully. Captain Alex Turner had timed the escape to coincide with a shift change in the guard rotation. Half the security personnel were off duty when the earthquake started. The other half were dealing with prisoners from other species who were genuinely panicking about the ground shaking. The human prisoners reached the surface evacuation areas and continued following emergency procedures. They boarded transport vehicles that Chris Evans had sabotaged to respond only to human commands. The trucks that were supposed to carry them to temporary shelters instead drove them to extraction points. The entire escape took less than 4 hours from start to finish. By the time Warden Keltharn realized what had happened, 347 human prisoners were gone without a trace. They left behind a message in Turner's cell. "Thanks for the hospitality." The cantina had become completely silent except for the sound of Zexathera's breathing. His 4 eyes stared into the empty glass as if looking for answers that no longer existed. The crowd of listeners pressed closer, sensing that this final story would be different from the others, darker, more personal. The 5th lesson was the hardest one, he began, his voice so quiet that everyone strained to hear. It came at the end of everything, when we thought we had finally broken the humans and could finish the war with one last battle. The merchant across from him had stopped drinking entirely. His food sat untouched and cold. Nothing seemed important, except hearing how the story ended. How a war between the mighty Kethvan Empire and a handful of human colonies had changed everything. 18 months after Blackwater, our fleets controlled 70% of human space. Their colonies were isolated. Their supply lines were cut. Their main fleet was scattered across dozens of star systems. High Command believed total victory was only weeks away. The Kethvan Empire had committed everything to ending the war quickly. 5 battle fleets, 2,000 ships, 500,000 soldiers. The largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Enough firepower to turn solar systems into dust clouds. Intelligence reports said the humans had only 43 ships left. Old vessels held together with spare parts and determination. No reinforcements coming. No hope of victory. They should have surrendered or tried to run to neutral space. General Patricia Hughes commanded what remained of the human fleet from the UES Liberty. Another old ship that should have been retired decades earlier. Hughes herself was nearing the end of her military career. Someone who should have been planning retirement instead of fighting hopeless battles. Our psychological analysts said the humans would seek terms. Negotiate some kind of conditional surrender that would let their civilians survive even if their military was destroyed. Standard behavior for species facing total defeat. The final battle was set for the Centauri system. Open space with no asteroids or planets that humans could use for tactical advantages. Clear sight lines for long-range weapons. Perfect conditions for the kind of direct confrontation that Kethvan forces excelled at. General Hughes brought her 43 ships to meet 2,000 Kethvan vessels in what everyone expected to be the last engagement of the war. The humans arranged themselves in a simple formation that offered no surprises or clever tactics. They looked like they were preparing to die with honor. Admiral Cortex gave the surrender demand over open communications, final chance for the humans to avoid complete annihilation. Hughes responded with coordinates for a meeting to discuss terms. Our admiral was pleased. The war would end without unnecessary casualties. But Patricia Hughes was not planning to surrender. She was planning something that no Kethvan commander had ever imagined possible. Science officer Tony Adams had been calculating impact vectors for weeks before the battle. Not for weapon strikes against enemy ships, but for collision courses between human vessels and critical Kethvan targets. The human ships began accelerating toward the Kethvan fleet at maximum speed, not firing weapons or attempting tactical maneuvers, just flying straight ahead like missiles aimed at specific targets. The Kethvan commanders thought the humans had lost their minds. Medical officer Dr. Rachel Kim was coordinating evacuation procedures throughout the human fleet, moving crew members to escape pods and shuttles that could be launched at the last possible moment, saving as many lives as possible while turning their ships into weapons. Hughes broadcast a final message to the Kethvan fleet as her ships approached ramming speed. Not a threat or demand for mercy, but an explanation of what was about to happen. The humans were going to ram every important Kethvan vessel and cripple the entire fleet using their own ships as kinetic projectiles. The mathematics were perfect. Science officer Adams had calculated exactly which ships to target for maximum fleet disruption. Command vessels, carriers, engineering ships, communication hubs. Everything the Kethvan fleet needed to function as a coordinated force. Admiral Cortex ordered evasive maneuvers, but discovered that 2,000 ships could not change course quickly enough to avoid 43 smaller vessels that were willing to die to complete their attacks. The human ships were too fast and too committed to their collision courses. The UES Liberty struck the flagship Corthon at 1,700 meters per second. General Hughes had evacuated most of her crew but stayed on the bridge to ensure accurate targeting. She died when her ship punched through our primary command vessel and destroyed the fleet coordination center. One by one, Human ships rammed critical Kethvan targets. Explosions lit up space like a series of small stars, being born and dying in seconds. The organized Kethvan fleet became a scattered collection of damaged vessels with no central command and no way to coordinate responses. But the humans were not finished. Dr. Rachel Kim had coordinated the escape pod launches to occur in specific patterns around the battlefield, hundreds of small craft that the Kethvan had ignored because they seemed harmless. Logistics coordinator Nancy White had spent months positioning supply caches throughout the Centauri system, hidden stockpiles of fuel, weapons, and equipment that could support guerrilla operations. The escape pods were not fleeing the battle. They were taking positions for the next phase of combat. The human survivors began attacking from small craft that were too numerous and too small for our heavy weapons to target effectively. Hit-and-run strikes against damaged Kethvan ships, rescue operations that saved human crew members and captured Kethvan prisoners. What should have been the final battle of the war became the beginning of a new kind of fighting. The Kethvan fleet was crippled but not destroyed. The humans were scattered but not defeated. Both sides faced months of irregular warfare in a star system that had become a massive battlefield. Communications officer Danny Pierce had programmed the escape pods with equipment that could intercept and jam Kethvan communications. Our fleet could not coordinate repairs or call for reinforcements. We were isolated in hostile space with enemies who knew the system better than we did. Week after week, human survivors picked apart the damaged Kethvan fleet. They attacked supply convoys. They sabotaged repair efforts. They rescued more survivors from disabled human ships and built their forces back up using captured equipment and salvaged materials. Engineer Bob Taylor led teams that boarded damaged Kethvan vessels and stole everything useful: weapons, fuel, computer equipment, even food supplies. The humans were rebuilding their fleet using pieces of ours. The Kethvan fleet that had entered the Centauri system expecting easy victory found itself trapped in a grinding war of attrition. Every day brought new attacks from enemies who appeared from nowhere and vanished before effective response was possible. Navigation Officer Kate Williams had mapped every asteroid and debris field in the system during the months before the battle. The humans could hide and move through areas where our ships could not follow. They owned the battlefield even though we had more ships. Admiral Cortex realized that his massive fleet was slowly being destroyed by an enemy that had officially been defeated in the first hour of battle. The humans had turned their own deaths into weapons and their defeat into victory. The worst part was that we could not retreat. The human survivors would follow us and continue their attacks in the next system. Running away would just spread the fighting across the galaxy. We were trapped by an enemy we could not find and could not defeat. 3 months after the Battle of Centauri, both fleets were shadows of their former strength. But the humans were growing stronger while the Kethvan were getting weaker. Captured ships joined the human fleet. Rescued crew members returned to duty. Supply caches provided everything needed to continue fighting. That was when High Command finally understood what we were fighting. Humans do not surrender because they do not know how to be defeated. Every loss makes them more determined. Every death teaches them new ways to fight. Every defeat becomes the foundation for future victory. Peace negotiations began 4 months after the battle that was supposed to end the war. Not because either side had won, but because the Kethvan Empire realized that humans would keep fighting forever. There would never be a final victory because humans treated every defeat as a temporary setback. The peace treaty was signed on neutral ground with representatives from 17 species serving as witnesses. The Kethvan Empire agreed to withdraw from all human territory and pay reparations for war damage. We also agreed to share technology and establish trade relationships. Zexathera finished his drink and sat in silence for several minutes. The cantina remained quiet except for the soft sound of alien breathing and the distant hum of station machinery. Everyone was processing what they had heard. The humans could have demanded complete surrender. They could have invaded Kethvan space and conquered our worlds. Instead, they offered partnership, trade agreements, cultural exchange programs. They turned their former enemies into allies. The scarred veteran stood slowly and looked around at the mixed crowd of species that filled the cantina. Humans sat next to Kethvan, former enemies sharing drinks and stories.